there's always been something so evocative about fae and fairy creatures that honestly I have been enamoured by from my childhood. First with like the rainbow fairy books with like, I can't even remember what they're called, but I remember absolutely devouring those books. Like you had originally the rainbow ones, and then they went into the weather fairies, and then there was animal fairies. There has been so many of those. It's honestly, I think, ridiculous personally. But they got me into fairies from a young age, and now I am older, through my teenage years and adulthood, I have always loved the fae and fairies. I don't know whether that's because of where I'm from. I'm from the Marches, which is on the border of Wales. We're West Midlands, but we've always had that sort of folklore from Wales and then some of the English folklore, and it's kind of merged together. And it's fascinating. And as a historian, I freaking love it. But anyway, I'm getting sidetracked. Hi, I'm Rachel. I'm Novel and Quill on Instagram and now on YouTube. And I make sewing and bookish videos. So I have some Fae book recommendations for you guys today. As I said, I have always loved Fae and fairies from a young age. And as I've grown older, the reason I like them has probably changed a little bit. Because originally it was like magic, fairies, pretty, cute. And now it's more like, give me political intrigue, give me the court system, give me evil. Are these guys actually evil or just misunderstood? But anyway, so without further ado, I will start with my first book recommendation, which I feel is a really mainstream book series, especially for YA. It is the Cruel Prince series, which is Folk of the Air by Holly Black, with the main characters Jude and Cardan. Jude is a human, effectively changeling, I think. But she's human and she lives in the world of faerie, and this is enemies to lovers. What more can I say? I would highly recommend it. It's quite, for YA, I feel like it's quite political. As in, it's quite a lot of court political intrigue with spies and power struggles. I still would highly recommend it. And I think most people have read it by now, but if you haven't, I would highly recommend you check it out. I also really love the illustrations in it, and the map illustrations, ooh, there we go, which change in all three books. There's more bits added, there's things taken away, and there's like small details. There's also like little swords, and the, oh, where are we? Where's the chapter break? The chapters. I am honestly so tempted to get some of these illustrations as tattoos, but I have one so far. We don't need more right now. I still haven't read The King of Elfheim. How the King of Elfheim Learned to Hate Stories. I still haven't read that yet. I do want to read it at some point, but I would still highly recommend the original trilogy because I think it's really good, and I think you should check it out. Which actually leads me on to my second book series. I only have one of the series in physical form, but it's currently 4 books. I think Kellen Graves has said it's going to be 9 books in total, but it is the Prince of Sorrows by Kellen Graves, which is also known as the Rowan Blood series. It does feel very much like A Cruel Prince. We have our 2 main characters, which is Saffron and Sylvan. Much like you have Jude and Cardan. Saffron is a human changeling. I'm going to really badly butcher this, and I'm going to apologise, because he's like, is it a Banshee? No. It's like basically written as bean-tied, I think, and I still can't remember how to pronounce that. But humans are basically like the lowest of low, they're the servants, which is kind of the same for Cruel Prince, except Jude and her twin sister have been quite elevated because of their Fae stepfather. Yeah. Whereas Saffron does not have that opportunity, and it's very noticeable between the two books that Jude has a lot more agency and power to begin with, whereas Saffron is clawing at every single opportunity and scrap of power that he can. The other thing to note with this one is that it is queer. We have our main Achillean romance, and I think there's other queer normative aspects to this. The difference I would say between Cruel Prince and this is that it is set in a school compared to just a court. Although I think by book 4 we're starting to move beyond that. I hope that's not a spoiler, but also I just think you should read this. And I would highly recommend... Oh, sugar. I would just highly recommend it. It's also, I think, another enemies to lovers book. So if you like that from A Cruel Prince, I genuinely recommend you should try reading this. I also really love the world building of this. The last note to say before I move on is it's not YA, and it is definitely an adult book, and so don't let your teenagers read it. I think you should read it. Next up, since we've moved to an adult book, I will stay on that line and go for the Merry Gentry series by Laurel K. Hamilton. Laurel K. Hamilton has also written another book series, which I think is the Anita Blake vampire series, which I haven't read, but if it's anything like the Merry Gentry series, I will probably read it at some point. This is not the first book in the series. I think the first book in the series is called A Kiss of Shadows. We once again are heavily entrenched in the two courts, so the Seelie and the Unseelie courts, which are, I think, your basic, foundation for Fae understanding. Our main character is half Fae. She is half human, and she currently, at the start of the book, isn't living in the courts, in the Unseelie court, which is where she grew up. However, in this series, she gets pulled back into it because she is actually a princess, and she is technically in line to the throne, a fact which her cousin is exceptionally unhappy about, and so is her aunt. And this series is basically dealing with that fact and how she needs to be the fairy princess that she honestly doesn't really want to be in order to stay alive. The reason I also think you should read this is if you like A Court of Thorns and Roses, if you like those reverse harem sort of stories. This was written in the early 2000s, and it has all of those boxes. It ticks all of those boxes. If this came out now, I genuinely think this would be all over your TikTok. It has the vibes of something that I think TikTok girlies should fall over themselves reaching for. But because it was published in the early 2000s, it's just been... And it's not something I think many people have heard of. I think that's a shame. I think it's actually... I was going to say I think it's well written. I don't think it's not a piece... It's not Ernest Hemingway. It is not your Shakespeare. However, I don't think that matters. I honestly actually really enjoy this book for the world building and the magic systems, but I will be completely honest with you guys and say that it is quite graphic. It is reverse harem, and she has a great many male lovers. There is also a couple of moments where it's very much of its early 2000s time, and while it's not homophobic, there is a couple of times when you're like, that would not pass go in a book that came out in 2025. I think with a pinch of salt, you would still recommend reading it. But yeah, if you love the court intrigue of Cruel Prince, I think this would do you some good. Or at least if you need a holiday book or a vacation book, this is easy reading. There is like 6 or 7 in this series, and you can get them on as ebooks, so you never have to see these covers if you don't want to. But it is quite easy, and it has sort of cliffhangers that lead into the next book, and it's an enjoyable few days of reading. So after that one, if you don't like your books as graphic as that one actually can be, may I introduce you to a book cover that looks like it should be quite graphic and actually is not. And this book was bought for me when I was like 12 or 13, I think, by my aunt, who took both me and my dad aside and went, I promise this book is not as bad as the cover looks. This is our cover. I really like the cover. As a mass market paperback, American mass market paperback, I don't think it's too bad. It's quite pretty and I like the art. The fact that, yeah, it's not graphic. It is an adult book, but I wouldn't worry about a 13-year-old reading it like my aunt didn't. Okay, but what is it actually about? So this is the Mercy Thompson series by Patricia Briggs. It is actually based around a coyote shapeshifter, who ends up involved. And to be fair, she's been involved since she was a kid in various packs and with werewolves. So the majority of the creatures are shapeshifters, werewolves. We get introduced to vampires she's come in contact with, one of which who drives a mystery machine look-alike. But it also contains the Fae. That's mainly in, I think, book 4 and later. But it's here because they are part of the series. With this series, we have the question of whether werewolves should come out to the public and reveal their existence. That's all on the line because the Fae have come out in public. I think they come out before this series actually starts. They come out in a way that's kind of fantastic in the sense that there's a murder, which, to be fair, was probably committed by the Fae. That aside, where a gardener is basically in court for killing his employer with some shears, and the whole reveal to the court and the rest of the world is that this guy could not possibly have committed this murder, because as soon as he touches the iron gardening shears, he loses his glamour and is suddenly a Fae, or something visibly a Fae. But that's obviously not the main point of this story. I think this book, which is called Iron Kissed, which is where we're kind of really introduced to the Fae, is actually about her old boss. So Mercy Thompson is actually a mechanic, and she bought her mechanic shop from her old boss, Z, who is there's a German word for it that it gets used, and I haven't read this book in a while, so I cannot remember it. But he is a ironsmith, basically. He is a weird type of fae who can actually touch iron. And this book is, I think, basically introducing him and more about him. This series, there is a lot of books in this series. Now, I can't remember whether there's like 14 or 16. I would not necessarily say you need to read all of those in one go. I've been dropping in and out of the series for years, and I really enjoy doing that because there's so many different storylines by this point that you don't necessarily need to know everything that's happened to understand the current book. Obviously it does help with like long overarching storylines, but they're also just really good single single books and stories, and I would highly recommend them. They're really enjoyable, and as I said, they're adult but they're not graphic, so if that's not your thing, I would recommend them. So fun times on the 5th time of filming this video, which I feel like it's cursed at this point. I think my microphone has got muted at some point in filming, and I have no idea currently when that was muted. I really don't want to film this for the 6th time, I will be honest to you guys, because I can't remember what I've said before, but it feels very much at this point like I'm repeating myself. We will do our last book before we reach the books on my TBR, and I'm going to apologise massively if I have had to do voiceovers for some of this, because I promise you I refuse to film this for a 6th time. I'm sorry. I love you guys, but not that much. So, the last book that I'm going to talk to you guys about, I've only read the first book in the series, and it has been described as Sherlock Holmes meets Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Now that I have seen Buffy the Vampire Slayer, I definitely agree with that description. But this book is Jackaby by William Ritter. As I said, I've only read the first book, so I can kind of recommend the series based on the first book. It isn't much like the Patricia Briggs. It is not set in a fae court, but it is set in a sort of, I can't remember if it's Victorian or Edwardian, to be fair, but it is, oh wait, it's 1892. Wait, 1892, 1901. So it's set in a Victorian New England. It is set around Jackaby, who is an investigator of the unexplained, and Abigail Rook, who is our female main character, is his new employee and assistant. The reason I thought to include this book in my recommendations for you guys is because in the first 5 minutes of meeting her, he deduces where she's been travelling from because of, I think it's an Eastern European sprite clinging to her hair or scarf, and it's that sort of normalised folklore that isn't necessarily true fae or fairies, but I wanted to include it because it's a light read that I highly recommend. I feel like it deals with some difficult-ish subjects, but in a way that young adults can handle and enjoy. So yeah, I would highly recommend it. And also do not look at the frog. Actually, to finish up the last one on that other than Do Not Look at the Frog, is Jackaby as a series I don't really see on Instagram. I think I remember seeing a little bit of a resurgence and recommendations for it when the new covers came out. I've still got the old covers because I had all of the books before that happened, but it's a series I'm surprised isn't talked about more. I know there is a load of books that either do or don't get talked about enough, and I do wonder, because it doesn't, as far as I'm aware, it's not graphic, whether that's kind of a reason that it's one of those books that gets left behind, which I do feel like is a bit sad. Anyway, ignoring my little manifesto there. My last two book recommendations, I say recommendations, the last two books I'm going to introduce to you guys are currently on my TBR. I have not read them. I've started reading one of them and I've really enjoyed what I've read so far, but it's been put down for a few months. Not because I dislike it, just because I'm a massive mood reader and I was trying to force myself to read it so I could review or recommend it to you guys, and unfortunately my brain does not work like that. So I'll start with that one, which is A Market of Dreams and Destiny, which is actually once again a queer book. It is an Achillean romance, I believe, and if you ever had to suffer through Christina Rossetti's Goblin Market, that was actually one of the inspirations behind this book, and it's set in the Undermarked, which is located below Covent Garden, and it is the place where you can buy and sell absolutely anything, including, as the main plot point to this novel, a princess's destiny, and a human who should not be really bartering with something like that is bartering with something like that. I just think you should read it, because that's kind of the reason I picked it up. It just sounded so interesting. I mean, a little bit of it was because this cover looked really cool, and I will be honest, that is one of the things that attracts me to certain books. But I just really loved the premise of the book. It just sounded so intriguing. I didn't actually tell you who the author is. It's Trip Gailey. So, A Market of Dreams and Destiny by Trip Gailey. It just sounded so interesting, which is one of the reasons when I was looking for more fae and fairy books that I picked it up. My last book on my TBR, though I'm sure there is other fae and fairy books on my TBR that I have just not remembered. But the next one is The Witch King by H.E. Edgmond. This contains trans representation and Achillean romance, where Wyatt ran away from Faerie and his betrothal to a Fae prince. Wyatt is a witch, hence the Witch King, and obviously Emir, who is the prince, has come into the human world to get his fiancée back, except his fiancée is now a male witch. I can't remember, I've had this on my TBR for absolute years, and I'm not entirely sure when I picked it up, but partly the cover called for me, and because it's at a time when I was definitely out looking for more trans books. I still do that. Wow, Rachel. I still do that, but it just kind of ticked all my boxes. It sounded really interesting. And so, yeah. What to say now? I should probably do the little promotion thing and say, if you guys have enjoyed my video, please consider giving me a follow. Drop a comment below if there's a Fae book that I've missed out that you definitely think I shouldn't have, or if there's something, especially lesser known, if you guys highly recommend it, I would love to know, because I am always one for adding new books to my TBR. It is about to crush me, but I'm still adding books to that. If you guys could consider giving a like to the video, that definitely helps the algorithm gods. But yeah, I have another bookish video this month coming out, which should be coming out at the end of the month, which is unsettling books for summer. I am 100% a spooky bitch, but I don't necessarily enjoy out-and-out horror books. I do find them sometimes too scary, and I feel like we are not in September and autumn just yet, so maybe we need some misty, unsettling books to sort of edge us into that feeling, as if I haven't already got a giant massive pumpkin pillow that I bought at TK Maxx. But anyway, I'm going to go and see at what point I muted myself and cry in a corner. But until next time, I will see you next time.